Acts chapter 20, starting in verse 6. Okay. And we sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came to them at Troas within 5 days, and there we stayed 7 days. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking to them, intending to depart the next day, and he prolonged his message until midnight. And there were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered together. And there was a certain young man named Eutychus sitting on the windowsill, sinking into a deep sleep. And as Paul kept on talking, he was overcome by sleep and fell down from the third floor and was picked up dead. But Paul went down and fell upon him, and after embracing him, he said, "Do not be troubled, for his life is in him." And when he had gone back up and had broken the bread and eaten, he talked with them a long while, until daybreak, and so departed. And they took away the boy alive and were greatly comforted. Yeah, we'll just stop there. Only because two weird things go on here. So, I don't know, maybe one. Okay, so what's happened? Where are we at in this story with Acts here? Paul's just in his missionary journey, right? And he's going from point to point to point, and Luke is recording and accounting for all of these things. And so when they had gotten from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. All right, so let's talk real quickly about the unleavened bread. I will be the first to admit I have no idea, nor do I appreciate the Jewish series of festivals and they're not festivals, they are observances.
Feast days.
Feast days.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, because that sounds pretty weird. Since we don't have feast days, do we, here in the United States?
Just to commemorate the manna in the desert, right?
Say again?
No, this is the Feast of Unleavened Bread had to do with the, when they left Egypt.
That's what I mean. When they left, or?
No, when they had to make the unleavened bread, but during the plagues.
Okay, yeah. Not the manna
No.
in the
Right.
desert, okay.
Yeah, so this has to do with leaving, when they actually were leaving Egypt, and the unleavened bread. So it's one of their major feast days.
Okay, and so what is it all about? What do we know about it? It's unleavened, okay? Means no yeast, right?
I know the big deal is, I don't know, I can't remember the drive behind it, but part of it is you had to sweep your entire house to get all the leaven, or whatever it is, yeast out.
Right.
It was ceremonial, but it was also, it wasn't just, you don't cook with it, it's, you get it out of the house.
Yeah,
Well, the unleavened part goes way further than that. It has to do when they were leaving Egypt, they had to be ready, they had to go quickly,
Yeah.
so they couldn't wait for it to rise.
Right.
So it also had to do with the killing of the lamb and putting the lamb on the blood on the doorpost, right? So they had to be, in fact, Moses told them, to stand there. God instructed Moses to tell them, stand there ready with their staff in hand, with their clothes on, ready to go, but so that they didn't have time to allow the bread to rise as that would normally do, so they didn't put leaven in it. And that's what it has to do with the feast day of them actually being released. Of God, releasing them from.
Is it related to sin too? Leaven is like usually related to sin.
Yes, leaven does. Yeah, and that's what the thing with Jay. That's part of the Jewish tradition during unleavened bread. Now is they go through the house and
They said that they put, depending on how many kids you had, they would hide some.
Yeah, that's
almost
part
like
of
an Easter egg type of thing where you hide it, and the kids had to participate to find it.
And is that more of a modern day?
Yes. Yeah, it's part of that's part of Passover.
Yeah,
It's part of the Passover tradition that they do now.
Right.
I know what he's talking about. It's in the original text in Exodus.
No Easter eggs in the original.
There's
text?
no sweeping out. No. What I mean, there's no sweeping out leaven. All it is
Right.
basic. All it is basic. They remember this every day, so they remember the power of God, redemption, getting out of Egypt, also the conquering of all the false gods, because you remember all the plagues were a testimony that our God is superior to their gods.
Right.
So it's all wrapped up into Jewish religion. And of course, like everything else, even with us, the Jewish people have kind of added on to it from tradition
Yeah.
over the years. But it's Mickey's exactly right. The original context was basically for them to remember every year the power of God, that He is the one true God. He redeemed us from being slaves.
And also to be ready, maybe.
That's why it's unleavened, to be ready at a moment's notice. They were leaving the next day, and they said, you don't have time to let the bread rise. Exactly right. That's all the original context.
It's actually done at the same time as Passover.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's celebrated because it all has to do with the passing over of the death angel over the.
So as I understand it, it's part of also acknowledging that you have to deal with sin.
Yes.
Whereas Passover was acknowledging there was sin and
Yeah.
that we needed a redeemer.
Yeah.
We needed something to help us. But the 11-day, the unleavened bread was to acknowledge I have the sin and I need to get rid of sin. I need to do something
It's an action
about
for
it.
you.
It's an action.
It's an act of faith,
Right?
right? They had to have faith that if they put the blood on the doorpost, that the angel would pass over.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if they didn't do it,
Yeah.
They died.
then they
Yeah, the sin complex didn't come until later on. The original, if you go to Exodus and read it, the original is all about God's going to redeem us,
Right.
just like you're saying.
Right.
Sin came in later on. And
Well,
but
all
the
of these
original
festivals have come later on, right?
Yeah.
This feast day is the original. If you go back again, you got to keep reading. Go to when God said, "Hey, on this day, remember this."
Yeah.
You got to go to read not what we think now, but go to the original text in the Bible.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
But there were things that were added to commemorate.
Yes.
Right.
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 So
From
the
that
whole
point
thing about, I mean, we did it here not years ago where they had the people come in and do
Right.
the whole
Yeah.
Passover dinner. That was all part of the commemoration of the
Right.
event. Like they were things that were done. They would hide during the meal. They would leave a place empty for the Isaiah or whatever. But that was all part of the tradition that they would do. There's an interesting pamphlet. In fact, I'll bring it one time for you guys to look at. That goes over the details of all the Jewish feast days, and it talks about how most of the spring days, feast days of the Jews were all fulfilled when Christ came, because all the feast days did with the Jewish feast days all pointed to Christ, and the spring feast days all were fulfilled when Christ came. The fall have not been fulfilled yet, and his second coming, Feast of Tabernacles, Rosh Hashanah, and all of the fall feast days for the Jews have not been and will not be fulfilled until his second
I
coming.
understand there's 7 feasts.
Yes.
7?
And there were three of them, I believe, where they had to go to Jerusalem on that day.
Right.
They had to travel on certain days. I think it was Pentecost was one of them. They had to go. I think Passover was one of them. That's why Paul always wanted to go.
Yep.
Jesus always wanted to be in Jerusalem for Passover, right? That's why he was there. But and then there's one in the fall. I want to say it's Rosh Hashanah is a new year, but Sukkot or one of them though, where they had to be in Jerusalem. So there were 3 days where they were mandated to travel.
Yeah.
It's why one of the reasons why. Besides the census, but one of the reasons it was around that same feast day that they, when Jesus was born in, they had to travel. So anyway,
But I like just at the beginning though. Basically, it's all about faith.
yeah,
Passover, it's all, the original, it's, in a sense, it's all about faith, pointing to Christ, through their faith, putting the blood over their doorpost, they were saved. Bottom line, from the angel of death, God's wrath. And I think that's the original context that we can take forward today. The blood of the Lamb protects
Blood of the
us
Lamb.
from God's
That's
wrath.
Amen.
It was all setting up for the Messiah.
It's one of the absolutes in the Bible is without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. That's an absolute thing.
And you're under God's wrath.
And when Jesus was with them in the upper room, 2 years prior to that, they didn't celebrate the Passover like they always did. And Jesus that night was saying, a new covenant. Just like y'all did the bread, thinking of the manna fell from heaven and the blood on the doorpost. Y'all gonna do it from here forward. Still use the same things, but it's gonna be about me now.
Right.
It's my blood. I'm the true bread that came from heaven. Not that, And that's why it says, this is my body, this is my blood. And a lot of people think, oh, that's really, he's saying, this is what it's going to represent now. Instead of thinking of that, what you were thinking about now, in the future, you're going to think of me and what I've done for you.
Right. Yeah, everything in the Old Testament, all the feast days, everything that happened, all pointed towards Jesus. All of the types and shadows and all of those things, that's why Christ got so mad at the Pharisees and the scribes, because they should have known this stuff, right? It's not like a lot of it was kept a secret, but there was a lot of it that they should have seen the types and shadows as to who they were pointed to, if they were truly doing what they were.
On the road to Emmaus, Jesus told them all the things that were pointing to him that they didn't realize. Like, all of a sudden, the light goes on, like, oh man, everything is about him.
Yeah.
But all pointing to Christ.
Yeah.
Well, you already know some stuff. Y'all smarter than y'all look.
That's the reason I just asked the question. Why?
I tell you what.
Yeah, I've been doing some reading lately. I've been doing some reading.
All right, so while that applies back then, that's great. How then does this apply to us today? Do we just look at this of these and go, yeah, that was back then. That's another country, that's another culture, so what, big deal? What?
Well, like Frank was just saying, even take the Passover as being, re-emphasized in celebrating Christ as opposed to what its original deliverance was. Original deliverance was from Egypt, but now, we celebrate that same recognition, service, the Passover, but we do it with recognizing his spilled blood and broken body.
Yeah. This reveals the character of God. It reveals God's plan of redemption, right? And being that it's fulfilled in Christ, now we look to him for all of this history and everything that we see, Old Testament following through Acts and everything. It's just that the focus is that our redemption, everything that we need, all that we need for our entire life, all is focused on him. And this was the transition, right? This was the transition of the Jewish Christians coming out of that, into Christianity, making the transition, which was what Paul was out preaching and doing,
Why is it important then that it's done every year? Couldn't we have just had like one big event and be done? Why do we do this each and every year? Why do we have like 7 of these?
Why does God mandate it in the Old
Why?
Testament?
Why?
because what happens if you don't do it?
Forget.
You forget.
And
Right.
it becomes less important,
Yes.
Important.
and therefore other things take over.
Right.
Yes.
And this is kind of resetting the clock, so to speak.
Yep.
And
Something's always going to fill the void.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we see that in our own history, right?
Right.
When you have certain holidays or festivals within our culture that are removed and replaced with other things, well, those things become less important. I mean, how important when we were growing up was it? I mean, we had holidays for Washington's birthday, Lincoln's
Right.
birthday, and all these things, right?
Yeah.
And
set aside.
so those are now pushed to the side and something else put in its place. Well, those days don't mean much anymore.
Right.
Pearl Harbor Day
Right.
used to be a huge day.
Exactly.
That, you hardly anybody on Pearl Harbor Day talks about it.
We're rapidly coming upon forgetting about 9/11.
Yeah.
It's slowly but surely. So that is why.
Write it on your doorpost, put it on, talk about it.
Right.
Put these things up to people, the kids will say, what's that for? And then you tell them,
Right.
Where am I?
Well, what's our commission?
What's that?
What is our commission?
Yes, absolutely.
Is to spread the word. If you
Go
can't
and
spread the
talk.
word, you
That's-
don't remember the word.
That's right. Exactly
You know,
right.
it's not a matter of just forgetting it, oh yeah, well, it's history, and yeah, if you wanna read about it, go look it up. But this is something, it's a reminder for us to keep doing this.
Yes.
Personally, I think all of these are, not memory makers, that's not the right word, things to remind you. If you miss it, I'm not gonna say it's not that big of a deal, don't get me wrong, I don't mean that. But your salvation is not based on you doing Passover meal, or even being baptized for that matter. Now, that's another discussion, but to me, all of those are representations, either to yourself, to God, or to the community. Baptism is not about your relationship to God, it's telling everybody else that I have a relationship with God. Right? It's announcing to the world, hey, I'm a Christian.
Yes, I'm part of this community.
I'm part of this community. I don't believe that you, let me rephrase it. I think there's people in heaven that have not been baptized.
Oh, yeah.
I would hope so if it's not that it's on
Right?
works.
You know what I mean? So I look at
I hope
it
so.
and looking back.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm not trying to belittle baptism, it's very important, and we need to
Well,
do
there's
it.
water baptism, but when you accept Christ, there is a baptism.
There is a
Well,
baptism.
okay, yeah, fair enough. But I'm talking about the water
But the
baptism.
water baptism,
So all these are man-made practices, what you want to call it, to help remind you and teach the younger generation, or the non-saved, however you want to word it, doesn't have to be age-wise, but the less mature Christian about these things.
So these religious observances have no connection to salvation?
Not directly, in my opinion.
I think they were, again, we gotta remember,
We got-
all this was written before
Right.
the New Testament.
Right.
All this was a confirmation of what I love about this, the reason why it's good there's too many teachers today who don't even, and it's unfortunately within our faith, it's becoming more common. They don't even want to talk about the Old Testament.
Yeah.
That's sad, because the Old Testament reveals the New Testament.
Right.
Believe it or not. That's all Paul had.
Right.
it's
Okay.
all built on the prophets.
That's
It's
right.
It's a
And-
continuation.
And then you got the other people who go way too far, and we need balance. But that's why I think it's so important. Well, let's read about it. Go read about it. It's pretty cool. It confirms my faith in
Yes,
Christ.
absolutely.
What God did not go, oh Lord, I didn't know this was going to happen. No, God had it set up from the beginning.
But your point is well taken, that everything I said is post-resurrection. Is New Testament philosophy, or whatever you want to call it. As opposed to, because in the old days, you did have to follow the law.
Yep.
That's how you,
Right, because Christ did not come.
you did
So
have
that's all,
something.
it's what,
You had
it's
to-
what they had.
you
They
had
had to,
sacrifice and all that, that's right.
that was all placing their faith. They had to do those things to place their faith in that because Christ wasn't here. It was all pointing to him, but
Right.
at that time, there was no, there was no Holy Spirit that was operating in, within every man, and so everything pointed to Christ. So God, there were times when people, and God would appoint prophets or whatever to say, hey, this is going to happen. This is going to be a sign that you're placing your faith in the one true God.
Right.
Right. So those things would happen occasionally throughout the history of the Hebrew nation.
Yeah.
Some would do it, some wouldn't, and the ones that did would pay the price for it. I mean, when all the plague of snakes came, right? And they bit the people, and they said, we'll make make a statue of brass and hold it up, a brass snake. Well, that was a sign of faith. There were some people that did, some people that didn't. One that didn't do it died. And that was just a moment of anyway.
That's what's good about having the Bible, because now we know we have truth here. Well, before this, and the prophet said, the Lord told me to tell you that, then you had to think, did the Lord tell him to do that or not? I mean, who's this guy, Can I believe? So then if the thing came true, hey, then he's a prophet of God, because it happened as he said. But if it didn't, yeah, so you're kind of like, do I believe this guy or not? So it was another, God was dealing with men in different periods a certain way,
Right.
Yes.
The only other puzzling question that I have in my brain is, if it's that important to Paul, why is it not important to us today?
That's a good question. That's what I was thinking of. I'm serious, I was with you.
What
Yeah,
part?
and there's a good answer too.
When you're saying what was important to Paul?
If following the observances of the unleavened bread and all that it meant at that time, why do we not also?
We do. The Lord's Supper
Yes.
was the same purpose and intent.
Yeah.
So do we just not communicate that well enough? Because I certainly don't remember in the longest time in a Lord's Supper event that what the bread actually represents and what it means, other than the it's my body,
Right.
and then they move on. There's an assumption made there.
Right.
Everybody knows it.
There are New Testament scriptures that are read, but there is no foundational scriptures as to where, you know, why do we use unleavened bread, you know?
Yeah.
And it's-
I've been in here, and I know, I can't specifically remember, but that where the message of the day is about all of that.
Mhm.
And you do the Lord's Supper.
Mhm.
You know, to me, I've done that dozens of times over my
Right.
career, that's
Yeah.
the term. But it's not necessarily every once a month or once a quarter.
Right.
So it's kind of like on Christmas Day, it's a Christmas story, you know, so.
And you know, Paul said he comes all things to all men, so he was around the Jews, he's gonna talk about, they still
Yes.
follow the law, I'm gonna talk about the law and stuff, what you believe, to share what I'm trying to share with you, and then when he's with, not with the Jews, he'll get right on to where he's at with them, giving them background since they didn't have the Jewish background, but.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just part of their religion, it was their life, it was their culture, it was everything, their whole existence was wrapped around those feast days. You know, that was their life. So it was more than just holidays,
Right.
like we have Christmas and
Right.
Easter. It was even more than that. It was how their life revolved around those, you know, those feast days. There were, I mean, just like their life revolved around Passover, right? Not Passover, on the Sabbath. When Sabbath came, you shut your life down.
Right.
Right? So everything was a lot more intense when it came to, you know, how those feast days impacted their life. I mean, when somebody tells you, you gotta travel, you know, you're gonna have to walk or ride 100 miles to get to Jerusalem on a certain day, you know, that took a lot of planning and everything else, but God commanded that if you're able, you go, you know, on these certain days.
But I love it.
And on
If
the
you
days
read-
that
if
you
read
can't drink
Deuteronomy,
wine.
there's things I love about God, though. He set up certain things that if you weren't able, what I love about it, you gotta go back and read it.
Yeah.
But you know, I think to answer your question, which is pretty important, because you know, you hear people go too far with the feast days and all that. Yeah, I remember Paul was a Jew. He never tied it into salvation, you know, past the cross. But he was still Jewish, his tradition, it was important to him. Now, who did he not bring with him, usually? Any Gentiles.
Right.
They were not,
Yes.
part-
Yes.
there's only one time he brought one Gentile, that's when he got run over the court, because they thought he brought, I can't remember the person's name.
It was
Was
Timothy.
it Timothy? They thought he brought him in. No, I didn't bring him inside the temple. They thought that's when Paul got in trouble. He
Right.
desecrated the temple. No, he came, but he didn't come in. So I think we need to, you know, again, it's important for a reminder, even for us today, but we got to be careful. He never said, hey, Gentiles, y'all got to come with me. Oh, no.
Right.
No, this is our tradition. This is what God set up for us. But you might want to learn about it because it did. Now today, when it sees that God is perfect, he set the plan in motion.
Right.
I think that's what we got to get.
And that's why Paul was so much, before he was saved, was out to get rid of those Christians, because they were departing from the, we
From
know
the-
that you
that's
bring
right.
sacrifices, and you do all these things, and these people are coming along with this new stuff, you know?
Yeah.
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 Okay, so that took us about 10 words there into
We haven't even got to the guy falling off the
the,
ledge.
exactly, we haven't got to that guy yet. Sorry about that. Notice in verse 6 at the beginning, it says, and we, and that would be because, why is it now we instead of
Because
they?
Luke is with him.
Luke's with him. Because Luke is with him.
And that's why he did the King James. They put that. But then you got to read down. It says the original text says we.
We.
Why would you do that? To me, I just hate that when you do that, because the original translation is the Septuagint is we.
Mhm.
Just frustrates me.
Yep, yep.
But I have King
Mine
James,
says
though.
we. Well, this is King James, it says we.
Yeah, mine says they, and then at the bottom it says, but the new Masoretic text says we. Well, why did you put we?
Yep. Right to the authors.
I did. I just
Dear
put,
editor.
dear editor. I scratched out they, put we. Don't worry, I got it.
They came to them. So I was getting a bit confused with the we and the they and the thems here. Came to them at Troas within 5 days. Who's the them there? Help me get it in context. Is it the guys up above in 5 and
Yeah, it's the guys up above that had gone ahead.
gone ahead, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so kind of what I thought that was. And they stayed there a week. And then in verse 7, it starts off with, and on the first day of the week, presumably that's their
Sunday.
Saturday. Their Saturday.
Sunday.
Is it Sunday?
Sabbath.
So they're,
To be Sunday.
Sabbath.
so their first day of the week
Sunday
is
is
Sunday as
Sunday.
well.
Yeah, you nailed
Is
it.
that right? Or is it not
No,
Sunday?
you nailed
Sunday.
it. The seventh day, Sabbath is the consummation of
Yeah.
perfection, so
Okay.
the first day is Sunday,
Yep.
what we call Sunday.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. When we gather together to do what with bread again?
Break
To
bread.
break the bread.
Yep.
To me, this is now donuts. Because it's got the yeast in it, full rise and everything
Beignets,
else.
huh, baby?
It's
Yeah.
beignets, baby.
Beignets, I hear you.
Exactly.
I hear you.
But it's not the Passover meal, it's
No.
just to eat.
No.
It's just to eat,
Just
right?
to
Right. It's and really in the
So
phrasing here, the break bread is that fellowship
Yep.
more than it is
Substance,
consuming the
yeah.
food of substance,
Mhm.
right? Here, so. And part of that, I believe, as you read into this, is kind of a farewell dinner or a bon voyage dinner or meeting, because the next sentence, Paul began talking to them, intending to depart the next day, and he prolonged the message until midnight here. So he was intending to leave, so this is a bon voyage type of gathering here. And Luke writes, and there were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered together. So why would he mention about the number of lamps in here? This is great. This is great. How about this? How hard is it to fall asleep when there's a brightly lit room?
Not a problem.
For some of us,
For some of us.
not a problem. We can sleep through anything. Okay.
Yeah,
But-
but the lamps might have made a lot of heat too, though.
Well,
There
yeah,
could have been
it's
that's
small.
why someone was standing by the windowsill.
But I took that as being, it might be one lamp, and we're having a conversation here on the side, and the rest of the room is quietly and maybe even sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
I took this as the whole room's lit up,
Yep.
and everybody's engaged.
Everybody's engaged, everybody's paying attention.
It's not just a one-on-one
Right.
in a corner, is the
Yeah.
way I took that. All the lights were on, as opposed to.
Yes, that Buticus, that's
Poor
right.
guy. There's one mention in the Bible. This had to be it. And so there's this young man, not really knowing how old. When they refer to young men, they usually mean around the 13, 14 of age.
You sure about that? Because
Pretty sure.
I know in Nigeria, this is totally different, but what they call youth, for a long time I thought that was teenagers. To them, a youth was any man of working age. You know, like from 15 or whatever to 50. And that was a major mind shift for me when people talk about the youth. And I've wondered about that, because I immediately turned that into the Bible, thinking, when they talk about young men, was it men of, I guess in the wartime days, it was men of military age that are able to do stuff,
Yeah.
as opposed to a child.
Right.
So that's why I wondered if this guy might not have been although later they say boy, or at least my translation says boy.
young to me.
Well, yeah. It's all relative.
Now, around Adam's time, when you lived to be 900 years, a young man would have been.
There is that point where all things relative.
Well after the flood, so
Yeah.
this is a 100-year range. But
And the
still.
only reason why I mention it is because throughout all of this point, they've not actually used the phrasing "young men"
Right.
in this,
Well,
other than
It was
to-
probably just younger than Luke, is probably what the
Probably
situation.
so. Yeah, that's
Well, the
true.
only reason I bring that up is just to keep your mind open, not
Sure,
trying to
it may have not
Yeah,
been
yeah,
teenage age,
exactly,
whatever,
yeah.
or an 8-year-old or whatever.
But obviously was not mature enough to stay awake. I'm sorry, that's my old man talking.
Or
right
in
there.
Jay's way, he had been working all day.
That's right,
They
exactly.
might have had a rough day.
Yeah, exactly.
Not just sitting around listening to Paul all
So
day.
Eutychus, he was sitting on the windowsill. He started sinking into a deep sleep, and as Paul kept on talking and talking and talking and talking, to me, that's in my mind. That's what I'm seeing in this. He was overcome by sleep and fell down. Right, and he fell and was picked up dead. So presumably others had picked him up. Probably Luke, as the doctor. Right, most is my guess on who's picking him up here. And I'm now pronouncing him dead, kind of thing. But Paul went down and fell upon him. I'm sorry, my mental picture was Paul was running down and fell upon him because he tripped over him because he was dead on the ground. Just, I found him. After embracing him, he said, and so this embracing, is it?
Bent over him.
Says bent over him. Yeah, that word embrace was a weird phrasing to me about embracing that. I don't know if that's like
I
an
better do a word
overt.
search, because it may be either one, I'm telling you,
Yeah.
it's something.
Well,
It
this,
could be
and
either one.
this is also, I mean, we find this with, which one of the prophets that had the woman whose son died. and
Jared.
Jared, Elijah?
Probably in the Old Testament, you're right.
Yeah, where he
Elijah.
laid on the child, or laid on the
Yeah,
boy,
yeah,
until,
yeah, one of
Elijah
those.
or Elisha, one of
yeah,
the two.
one of the two.
I think it was
Well,
Elijah.
I'm
Kind of
picturing
something
that,
similar.
Yeah,
if
something
you
like
can
that.
imagine someone on the ground, you
Yeah.
fall to your knees,
Mhm.
and to see if you're breathing, put the ear to your chest, that type of thing, you look like you're embracing it, that's what my picture was.
Yeah,
Okay.
he said he was knocked out, he's not dead.
Yeah. And I wonder if the third story is the US version of the third story, or the UK version of the third story.
So is it unto itself a healing that happened here, or, you know what I'm saying? Because the way it's worded, I don't get a sense of it necessarily a healing, because I don't see any like rejoicing that he was healed, you know, but more they were glad he was okay. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
In the wordings here, it just
Yeah.
In
feels.
other words, there wasn't a big celebration, this is,
Right,
you know, this special event that had happened or anything like that. you know.
exactly.
Why is this even included in this story?
Great
It's a
question.
good question.
Great question.
Luke was a detailed,
Yeah.
he wrote the details.
And, you know, I guess it was important to Luke because he picked the dude up, maybe Luke was the one that picked him up dead, thinking he was
So
dead.
he was
So
involved.
it was
that's
involved in
why
the whole
he-
thing, and, you know,
They
it
fall
could,
out of the third floor window and survive, which is kind of noteworthy.
It's certainly a story you'll tell over and over again.
Yeah.
so Paul just gave him a second opinion, that's all. The dude's not dead.
Sit down, come on. Where'd you get your degree? Walmart? Come on.
Yeah, but it did say taken up dead, so
Yeah.
someone said,
Yeah, somewhere I read that he died, and actually did die, then he brought him back.
This could be, you know
But
what?
because of what he said,
That's what Jay said, I
But
never
it's
thought,
like-
he might not have been dead, they thought he was dead, but
Right.
he's not dead, so it could be taken both ways, it's pretty, I never, till you
Absolutely.
said that,
Yeah.
we can, it's open-ended, really,
Yeah,
it's open-ended, never thought
Like,
about that.
you know, it's a point because
Yeah.
Luke doesn't make a big deal.
No,
Right.
you're right.
Right.
You know,
Of the recovery or of,
Mhm.
yeah.
They
That's-
pick him up, you know, they pick him up and,
I never thought about
Carry
that.
on.
Yeah, they didn't go, oh, look at this, he's healed. No, he
He's
just
gone to go
he's
phone a
okay.
friend.
He's okay.
Okay,
maybe that's why Paul said what he said.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
okay, just so everybody
I
knows.
never thought about it. I never looked at it from that point. See, Friday mornings are good, y'all. I'm telling you, I never looked at it from that point of view before.
so if you take 11, it's like really downplayed because it says, and when he had gone back up and had broken the bread and eaten, it's like we're back to
Yep.
where we're at. And by the way, let me continue my sermon.
right.
Is what's going on here. So amazing, absolutely amazing.
You know, Jesus did this something with a little girl that had died too, and, you know, he made the comment that she's not dead, she's just sleeping,
Right.
Mhm.
right?
If she was dead.
Here's at least one commentary though that makes an issue of it, not saying as dead, it said taken up dead. So, meaning, at least in his view, he was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, this text and so many of them, I love it. You gotta assume certain things.
You have to assume.
It can be taken, you go to another commentary where they say something opposite. And it's interesting because sometimes you just gotta say, we don't know exactly.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm with you, because this could be, and then you gotta go to the original text, because then it could be, well, no, it's, but I never looked at that point of view. 'cause
And
you
this
read
is
that
not
both
even enough
ways.
information to even make an opinion.
No.
My opinion is this.
Yeah, and it's an opinion.
Totally open-ended.
Yes.
And when we get to heaven, the guy say, hey, I'm the guy that fell.
I'm Eutychus.
And this is what happened.
We straighten out all the rumors.
I'm the dummy that fell down the tree. And I was actually not dead, Paul. I was right. Luke
I
was
really
wrong.
wasn't sleeping either, I just closed my eyes,
That's
my
right.
arm slipped, and yeah.
Yeah.
As Howard
I was
said,
resting
Luke
my
got a
eyes.
Walmart degree in
That's
medical.
right. Walmart degree. Come
It
on.
was Billy that elbowed me to wake up, and then he pushed me out the window.
Exactly. Okay.
That's funny.
All right, we need to stop here. Okay. What are you guys praying for?